So you were in the service during the war then?
Yeah, during the Popular War. I have to draw a distinction. In those days, of course, anybody who was past 18 and wasn't in the war was looked upon by the general populace as had to be something wrong with that. And as I mentioned before, I turned 18 while I was still in college. And I had completed 2 years of service, 2 years of college at the time. And my number came up. By that time, as soon as you turned 18, you registered, and they would get you into service as a draftee. And being a nice Jewish boy, that's the only way I was going to go into service, as a draftee. As a matter of fact, my mother wanted me to make a case, tell them I was in college, tell them this, see if I could get an exemption. And I really didn't want one, but there was no way you were going to get one anyway, as long as you were healthy. So I turned 18 in November, and by March, I was inducted into service. March 31st to be exact. And not having volunteered, it was really the luck of the draw that they assigned me to the Air Corps. If you recall, in those days, there was no separate Air Force. It was part of the Army. It was the Army Air Corps. They moved me out to Fort Dix in New Jersey, where I waited for assignment, and that's when they shipped me. Get this, I had never been that far south in my life. The next place they shipped me was to Miami Beach. Now, that didn't seem too hard to take, but that's where I took my first basic training, in Miami Beach as part of the Army Air Corps. Now, Miami Beach could be a lot of fun, you know. During the summer, though, I learned what a hot Florida sun could do, especially if you had to stand in full uniform in a Sunday afternoon parade, which were held every single week. I mean, that was my first memory of Army life, is watching guys fall down like flies while they were standing at attention in this Florida sun. In any event, that was my Air Corps basic training. Now, while I was down there, certain things developed. Number one, I was blessed with good eyes, which meant that whether I wanted to be or not, I was going to be a flyboy. They needed aerial gunners and other people who flew. So I was destined to be an aerial gunner. At that time, I found out that my cousin Stanley, who was 2 months older than I, was going to become a navigator. Now, as a navigator, you became an officer. And Stanley and I were brought up in the same house. He lived upstairs, and we lived downstairs. So we were very close together. And as this would happen in many families, being first cousins, we had competition right through school. I was a little concerned that my Aunt Mary, this wonderful person that she is, would be lording it over my mother a little. So I decided I better become an officer. Honestly, that's really the only reason why, although later on I was very happy I did for all other kinds of reasons. So I applied for aviation cadets. I passed the physical, I passed the mental, the written exams, and now I was waiting for assignment to aviation cadets. At the same time, they had a program in the Army which they called ASTP, Armed Special, I don't even remember what it was for, but it was a method of sending those who were qualified intellectually to colleges. And you would stay in the college for a while, and they'd make an engineer out of you, or even doctors. The Navy had a program called the V5 program, which was the same thing. And gee, that sounded great too. It sounded a lot cleaner than going out and having people shoot at you. Now, so I applied for that too. And after I was accepted into cadets, aviation cadets, they contacted me and said I was accepted into the ASTP program, and they were ready to assign me to some college in the country which we knew nothing about. But as soon as they found out that I was a qualified cadet, they said that high priority. But if ever I washed out of cadets or didn't make it, come back to them, maybe they would send me back into the ASTP program. Turned out to be a very lucky thing, because about 2 months after that, maybe 6 months after, they wiped out the whole ASTP program. Put all of these guys who look forward to an easy life in college into the infantry. A friend of mine, was Paul Feldman, ended up plugging the gap in the Battle of the Bulge. And all I could do was say, thank God, I qualified as a cadet. In any event, I'm sitting there waiting for assignment to cadets when my orders come through, and this will give you an idea of Army efficiency. The orders came through to send me up to radio school, because I was going to become a radio operator gunner, which was better than being an ordinary gunner, I guess. And I said, but I'm waiting for cadets to call me. And the official Army position was, well, they'll catch up with you. In the meantime, go up to radio school. So I said, well, that's not a bad idea. I'd go up to radio school, and if I finished radio school, if they ever washed me out of cadets, which was not unusual, they wouldn't end up sending me back to the infantry. I would have an MOS, they call it, a major occupational specialty, that could then be assigned. And I still thought that aerial gunners had a cleaner war than the infantry. So I ended up going up to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And at least I was getting to see the country. Going up by train, and I guess in those days it must have taken 3 days to go from Miami to Sioux Falls. And I started in radio school. And that was an interesting experience, because we used to run there 24 hours a day. They would have 3 separate sessions of 8 hours. They were really anxious to develop these Air Corps boys. Excuse me. And now I got started, so it was a 20-week course, if I remember. And as I was approaching the 10th week, I said, boy, I hope they don't call me. Now I'll have this specialty. It'll be a fallback position. And let them wait. But they called me. They called me. I said, look, I'm halfway through. Let me finish. There's nobody to talk to. In those days, even though you spoke to people instead of computers, these people would know more than automatons anyway. So I said, no, you're going into cadets. I said, okay, so we'll go to cadets. The first thing is, well, it's now been 6 months, I think, since your basic training, so you're going to have to take another basic training. I don't know why, but another basic training on the ground so that I could become a pilot or a navigator or something like that. I don't know. So I said, okay, I figured I'd get to see the country more. Next thing you know, I find myself on a rickety overnight train with wooden benches that reminded me of the trolley cars back in Brooklyn. Overnight, remember? We slept on these wooden benches all the way down to Lincoln, Nebraska. Now, if you're not familiar with your geography, that's very close. It was just overnight. And here we go out into this Lincoln Air Base, and I'm going through another basic training. And I find out there that my next stop is not going to be classification, but they're going to send me to college. Because I didn't go directly in, they figured all of us older people, I wasn't yet 19, I don't think, would have to go back to college to refresh ourselves so that we would be ready to take the written exams at classification. So I said, great, send me back to college. Maybe they'll send me back to NYU. You know, I knew that NYU had a class there, and get back east. Because you have to recognize, I had now been in the Army almost a year and had not been home once. I had never been away for more than 2 weeks at a time in my whole life, but here was almost a whole year that I was gone. But I figured if I'd get back home. So they get me, I get my first assignment, and they never tell you where. It's a big secret. I never understood why, but it was a big secret where you were going. So we get onto the bus, and instead of driving down to the railroad station in Lincoln, Nebraska, the bus keeps going, goes up, I think it was a little north, to Omaha, Nebraska. And they deposit me to, oh gosh, I can't remember, Creighton University. in Omaha. Now, Creighton, for those of you who don't recognize it, is a Catholic school. And here's this Lionel Cohen marching into this Catholic school. And now I'm going to take my CTD, they call it, Cadet Training Detachment. Before I could get unpacked, somebody comes up to me and asks, "Are you Lionel Cohen?" I said, "Yes." They said, "A mistake has been made. You weren't supposed to be on the ship. You were listed as a supernumerary." I said, "What's that?" Supernumerary is a substitute. If somebody who was supposed to go is sick or can't go, then you go. But everybody came, so now you got to go back to Lincoln, Nebraska. So I said, "Okay, that's all right. This wasn't much of a trip anyway." So I'll go back to Lincoln, Nebraska, wait for my next assignment. And I said, maybe I'll go to NYU. Maybe I'll go to some other college. Maybe all this other kind of thing. I get my next assignment. Again, I get on a bus, and I figure we're driving down to the railroad station. This time, we don't even make the railroad station. They deposit me at the University of Nebraska, which is in Lincoln. So I didn't get to see the country, but I have to tell you, that's the first time I saw a real college. Remember, I went to City College. City College downtown. Our campus was the 9th floor of a 16-story building. And here they deposit me in this Midwestern University, University of Nebraska. It's great. We have a run-of-the-mill of the place, but there are no guys there. The only real students there are girls, the co-eds, because all the guys are in service. And the only other ones in the school are they had an ASTP attachment. It had not yet been wiped out at the school, but these guys couldn't match up to the sharpness of the aviation cadets. So it was really great for a couple of months. I found out something there very interesting. Having been brought up in New York, and even though I did very well in school, as I mentioned before, I never realized how good the New York City school system was until I was out here. I went to City College. City College was so rough, and maybe it was a sign of the times or what have you. I had a hard time pulling a C average for my first 2 years. As a matter of fact, I didn't. And here I'm out at the University of Nebraska, and all the other guys out there with me are college kids from all over the country. And we're being taught by college professors, and they're teaching us English and physics and math. And I'm looking at these courses, and they're making me think I'm back in high school. And yet all the other guys in my group were working like crazy every night. Now, it wasn't just that I was a wise guy, but I really appreciated two things. I appreciated how good the New York City school system was, and I guess how smart I was. I walked away with a certificate, which must be someplace in my papers, saying that I had the highest average in the whole detachment. So it did wonders for my ego. I also played basketball there. That's part of it too. So anyway, we went through the University of Nebraska, and at this point I swore I was never going to go back to City College. I was going to go to a real college. I was going to go to a college that wasn't just an advanced high school. We were going to have fun in college. First of all, the competition wasn't nearly what I had at City, and all these other kind of things. That's another story. If I jump ahead, I'll tell you that when I got out of service, everybody got out of service, and the GI Bill of Rights opened up the doors for everybody to go to college. And no colleges were taking transfers.
Where did you go from the college?
The only way I could go to another college was to deny I ever went to college in the first place. And that would have meant giving up 2 years. Since I was already giving up 3 years in service, and I made it just right. So I went down to, while I was at the University of Nebraska, I had my first taste of flight training. I actually took 10 hours of instruction flying a plane. It might sound very interesting, but you have to understand, I never drove a car. I didn't have the slightest idea what was going on. And here I was flying a plane. So if I tell you I flew a plane before I drove a car, think about that for a while. I was not very good. I mean, I really had my problems. So when the time came for my 10-hour check, after 10 hours, they were going to check me out. we get into the plane, and the guy says, "Okay, rev her up." And I rev her up, start the motor. And the plane starts forward. And the guy says, "Put your foot on the brake, you dummy," or something like that. I said, "Where's the brake?" So you see, I wasn't too good as a pilot. But I was screaming. I was saying, "I don't want to be a pilot. I want to be a navigator. I don't have to fly a plane. Let somebody else fly it."
Did you go right from the university then onto assignment as a navigator?
No, from the university we went down to Santa Ana, California, which was where we took the final test, and in which they categorized you and figured out whether you were qualified to be pilot, bombardier, or navigator. Those were the three classifications. You took a series of written exams, a series of coordination tests, and which included things like map reading and all the other kind of stuff. And the way they put it was that you were graded after all your tests, all this thing, they would put it together, and you would be graded from 1 to 9 for each of the three categories. And you needed like a 5 in the pilot category to qualify, a 6 in the bombardier category if you wanted to be a bombardier, and a 7 in the navigation category. Well, I got a 9 for the navigation, which was really maximum, and that was great. And as I mentioned before, I wasn't too surprised because this was mostly math work, which was my strength. But I got a 9 for the bombardier also, so I could have picked one or the other. Pilot training, I got a 2, which wasn't too good. So I wasn't going to become a pilot anyway. I think I figured I'd better learn how to drive a car first before I flew a plane. So it so happened that they really needed the navigators. So those that qualified as both navigator and pilot were not able to go into pilot training. They insisted they needed more navigators than they did pilots in those days. So that's how I became a pilot. Now, by the way, I hadn't been home yet. All this time, I had not yet been home. So from Santa Ana, they were going to send us to navigation school. But those of us who became navigators and bombardiers first had to go to aerial gunnery school. Now, here's a guy that never handled a gun in his life. I really didn't like him. My father served in World War I as a pharmacist and used to brag how in his service he never picked up a gun. And he was such a pacifist that he never really allowed us even toy guns in the house. But now I was going to go to aerial gunnery school.
Was that also in California?
No, that was in Kingman, Arizona.
Arizona.
Kingman, Arizona. It was a town of 2,200 people, of which 2,000 were Indians. And that's where you had the Kingman Aerial Gunnery School. But I spent some time there. I learned how to shoot 50 caliber guns. I learned how to dismantle carbines. I learned how to handle 45s and all the other kind of stuff. And I actually was able to hit the target a few times at 40,000 feet. Those were my first experiences flying.
So you were in Arizona, and then from there, did you have any more schooling before you went overseas?
Well, I had to go to a navigation school. How to become a navigator. So what we found out was that there were 3 possibilities. And all the time in the back of my mind, I'm thinking about getting home. And they said that they would divide the class up into 3 groups. The first group would go to Honda, and that would be in San Antonio. And we would have 1 week to get there. Now, that meant that we could have a delay en route. That was not a real furlough, but it meant that you could go wherever you want as long as you got to San Antonio in 1 week. Now, in those days, we didn't have commercial airlines, and there was no way that you could get home and back to San Antonio. So that wasn't my first choice. The second group of people was going to go to Selman Field, which is Monroe, Louisiana, and they would have 2 weeks to get there. And the third group was going to go to Ellington Field, which is in Galveston, Texas. And they would have 3 weeks to get there. That, of course, was ideal. So how were they going to decide this group? And they came out with the great information that says they were going to do it alphabetically. And here I'm sitting there with a C in my last name. And I was sure I was going to end up with 1 week to San Antonio. And I don't know what I would do with the extra days in the desert between Arizona and San Antonio. But as luck would have it, the way the Army worked is they went by rank. See, not everybody that went into aviation cadets started as a private or a PFC. There were some non-commissioned officers, corporals, sergeants. There were even some commissioned officers who might have been there. So they were first. They would go by rank first. So there were enough people who were non-commissioned or commissioned officers that pushed my C, co, and name down like 5 below the cutoff for those that were going to go to Hondo Field in Texas. So my only concern was that nobody up there should get sick, because then they would just move the level up. So it worked. Mm-hmm. So I had 2 weeks to get to Selman Field, and that meant I could get home.
I see.
By train. It meant I would have about a week at home. I think it was like 3 days to get home from Arizona. Maybe 4. Maybe I didn't have a full week. I don't remember too well. But it really was my first time home at that time. And this was like about 15 months after I had been in service. The first time I came home. And I was like a returning war hero, except the war was still on. But it was pretty good. I don't have too much recollection of the time at home, except my parents were naturally thrilled. Then I went down to Selman Field in Louisiana and went through navigation school, which was good. Nothing exciting. It was another school, and it lasted 4 months. In any event, I finished, I sort of remember it's October 29th, which is Cheryl's birthday, but I think it might have been the 28th. It was right around that time, and that's when I graduated and got my commission. Just before we graduated, they came out with this new story about this new technique being used for navigation and bombing, and it was called radar. First came out at that time. And they had all of us take aptitude tests to see whether we would be qualified to apply for radar training after we graduated. And I passed. I don't know what they used, because whether it was map reading or what. The ones who were given these aptitude tests were graduate navigators and graduate bombardiers, because radar, as originally used in the airplanes, was for both bombing and navigation purposes. So my question to them was, where is this radar school? Where will I go? What will I do? I knew what would happen if I didn't go to radar school. What would happen is we would go into what they call phase training. They would transfer us out to someplace in the wide open spaces, whether it was Montana or Idaho or places like that. You would join a crew and you would go through a couple of months of flying together with the crew. If you went to radar school, they'd send you to another school. I said, okay, where is the school? And they said, Coral Gables, Florida. I said, well, that's enough of a reason to opt for radar. So I said, great, I'll go to radar school. Only by the time my orders came through, they decided to close the school in Coral Gables. These surprises happen every so often, you know. They happen so often that you really shouldn't even be calling them surprises. It's expected. Mm-hmm. It's something that's going to change. So I said, well, where is the school? And I didn't recognize the name, but when they mentioned it, I said, oh my God, that's California again. There I go out to the West Coast. But it turned out to be Langley Field, which, as you know, is in Virginia. And that was just great. I went up to Langley Field. Now I was an officer, and I didn't even need furlough papers to get up to New York or what have you. All I had to do was find rides, and I was able to get up to New York every weekend if I could, you know, as long as it was. Because schooling was generally during the week, Langley Field, I joined my crew. My crew had already been through phase training, and it was a B-24 crew, B-24 Liberator. And the radar operator, in effect, replaced the ball turret. So they had to give up a gunner, and I took the place of the gunner. Because the ball turret disappeared, and instead of the ball turret, that's where they put the antenna, the radar antenna. And now to protect the plane from underneath, from its soft underbelly, instead of having that ball turret, they put 150 caliber gun, which they called the belly gun, which shot down. And that was my responsibility. So I knew there was a reason I went through aerial gunnery school. So we had a fairly comfortable time in Langley Field. I was able to get home several times. I no longer felt like they were taking advantage. But the day of reckoning came, and now we had to go for our assignment. And my crew was assigned to go out to the Pacific. So to do this, we were put on a cross-country train, troop train, going from Virginia out to California, someplace called Salinas, California, Mather Field, I think. And that's where we were going to pick up our own plane. We were going to pick up this new radar plane and carry it and take it out ourselves instead of flying out to join a combat outfit. We were going to bring our plane with us. A brand new technique, brand new technology. This was going to solve all your problems. You know. And the radar man, which I was, we had a regular navigator on the plane, and we had a regular bombardier. So the radar man was along, and he was going to take care of things when you couldn't see anything. You know, either when you were too many clouds and you couldn't see the ground, or you were over the ocean and there was no ground to see. And it would be a great method of navigation and a great method of bombing when there was too cloudy. So we picked up the plane, and we were given an assignment to fly out to the Pacific, and our group headquarters was out in Guam. However, to get out there, you had to make several stops. The range of these planes was not so great. I think the B-24s could do maybe 3,000 miles. So our first stop was going to be Hawaii. And we took off, and all the guys were fooling around and saying, okay, hotshot, let's see what you can do. And between California and Hawaii, they had what they called 2 picket ships. And the picket ships were nothing more than targets to be used for radio or radar to home in on and help to position yourself. So we turned on the radar set, and we were going to home in on the first target. And I turned on the switch, and it goes, poof!
Oh.
It blew.
Oh, jeez.
The whole set blew. Now here I was not only a radar operator, but my son-in-law, among others, will get a big kick out of this. I was a radar operator / mechanic,
I see. You're supposed to be able to fix
which
them.
means I was supposed to be able to find out what was wrong
Uh-huh.
and be able to fix it, maybe, you know, if we had the parts. Well, the full extent of my background, I checked the fuses. And they were all good. I said, I guess we'll have to wait till we get there. And amid the jazzing of everybody else in the plane, we flew without radar. Now, a radar operator without radar is a pretty useless piece of equipment. So we landed in Hawaii. The first thing I do is I go down to the radar shack. I said, hey, come fix my plane. Come fix the radar. And the guy says, I'm sorry, we can't touch your radar, because if we did, we would ground the plane, and we're not allowed to because you guys are waiting for assignment to a combat area. You'll have to wait till you get out there. So I spent 10 days, we spent 10 days in a colorful place called Barking Sands on the island of Kauai in Hawaii, just waiting for assignment. A separate story to tell, but
So you were in Hawaii for 10 days. What did you do during those days the radar wasn't being fixed?
Well, we really didn't do anything, but for one of the days that we were there, they put us on guard duty. It was guarding the airfield, against what, I don't know, but the regular guard, they would put 6 enlisted men, and 2 officers were made officers of the guard. So they took our crew, and the most junior members of the crew, namely the bombardier and myself, were made officers of the guard. And they gave us a little hut to sleep in. And they told us we'd be 2 hours on and 4 hours off. And we'd have to change the guard every 2 hours. The guard consisted of 2 people. And they gave us a Jeep. Because the guardhouse was maybe a mile or 2, can't remember exactly, from the airfield. And Tex, my bombardier, then a name right out of the movies, and I were the officers of the guard, and go take care of it. So as we went, I said to Tex, I said, look, unless you want to stay awake all night, you better teach me how to drive. Nobody understood that people who came from New York City or Brooklyn, really, we never owned a car. None of my friends' families ever had cars. There was never any opportunity to drive. As I mentioned before, I flew a plane already, but I never drove a car. So we got into this Jeep, and he gave me a quick hurry-up lesson. He says, here's the clutch, here's the brake, here's first, second, third, and reverse, and good night, I'm going to sleep. So I took that Jeep out there, and I started to fool around and practice with it, and learn to go forward and learn to go back. And I guess it was all right. You know, that's a wide open field, so you can do all the practicing you wanted. Except these Jeeps were a little tougher than the fluid drives that everybody's used to right now. If you didn't feed it the gas just right, it would cut out on you. And that's what I had to learn, the clutch control, clutch and accelerator moving in tandem. Well, it started to pour that night. It was coming down buckets, really raining. And we had to move our own crew members, which was a good thing out because they all knew us. So when it was my turn to go out there, I never drove. I just asked one of the other guys to drive. And they would take out, and of course we were picking up crew members coming back. And I'm sure I must have broken one of the articles of war or something doing it. But I figured that was the only safe way to do it. But as luck would have it, while one of the gunners was driving, he hit a ditch. The rain, the heavy rain, had washed away a part of the airfield. And as he was driving, he's an open Jeep, he hit with the front wheels, hit it, and it jolted, and the back wheels jammed up into this little ditch. That's about how wide it was. Everybody got shook up a little. One of the guys in the front had a little piece of his ear cut off. I banged my knee up against it. And right away I started to worry. What happens now? How do I explain this? Or I can't admit that I had let somebody else drive. And what happened, we got out, we picked the Jeep up so that it got out of the ditch. Excuse me. And after that, I started to make some noises. I didn't know what was wrong. So when it came time to turn it in, about 6 o'clock in the morning, we were finished with our tour. So Tex and I drove the Jeep back to the motor pool, and I figured I'd report that something had happened with the Jeep. Only nobody was there. So we just left the Jeep and went to sleep. About 10 o'clock in the morning, we get a knock on the door, and Tex and I were in the same room. We open it. Says, "Were you the 2 officers of the guard last night?" I said, "Yeah." Says, "What happened to the Jeep?" So I volunteered to start to tell the story. He said, "Oh, were you the guy that was in it?" He says, "The adjutant general wants to see you." Well, now, thoughts are going through my mind. What do I say? How do I put the story together? Do I admit that I couldn't drive? What was I doing there? Do I admit that one of the other guys was driving, or what have you? We went in and spoke to the guy, and I told him what had happened without mentioning who the driver was. And he said, well, why don't you take the motor pool officer out to the spot and show him and see if you can find the ditch again? And I said, okay.
Oh,
Or yes, sir, as the case may be. I think he must have been a major. He seemed much more authoritative than I wanted. And I figured the motor pool officer is now going to tell me to get into his Jeep and drive him out to the spot. He's going to see that I can't drive, that I don't know how to drive. But luckily, as with a lot of motor pool officers, he had his own little pet Jeep that was souped up or geared to his own uses, and nobody else was going to drive this.
mhm.
And that was fun. So he took me out to the spot, and we did find it. We found this washed out area. I told him what happened and everything like that. He says, well, he says, this is what will happen. When we get back there, you'll sign a statement of charges. Just telling you the whole story. And if the damages are less than $100, that's the end of that. Now, I guess I've signed some other form. And he said, if the damage is less than $100, that's the end of that. If it's more than $100, you'll have to sign a statement of charges or something, whatever that meant. I said, okay. Went back, and the next day we shipped out. So one of these years, I expect a letter
Oh.
from the War Department
Yeah.
telling me I owe them for one Jeep. I never did hear a follow-up.
Never resolved.
Never.
Oh.
And thus ended my saga of Hawaii, and the first time in my life I ever drove a car. I guess.